welcome back to another video and welcome to spooky season. So today I thought I would talk about my top 3 spookiest stories that I've experienced in the ocean. I am a dive instructor. I've done about 600 dives in total, and I've done dives in South Australia, Queensland, Bali, and Komodo. Vast majority of my dives, they're pretty good. Nothing really happens, but there have been 3 particular events that have really stuck with me. The first story I want to talk about is more of like a feeling and experience. The second one is about how I actually saved my mum's life. And the third one is something that's still sends chills down my spine to this day. I cannot explain the third story, but let's get into it. The first story starts in the Coral Sea, or about 300 kilometers off the east coast of Australia. And normally the Coral Sea is this gorgeous expanse of blue. It's about 30 to 100 meters visibility. It's incredible. Except this one time, I was diving at about 30 meters looking for sharks because, you know, what else am I going to do? As I'm sort of sitting at 30 meters, I sort of feel like a calling almost. Go deeper, go deeper. What's just beyond what you can see? In the dive, I kept having to remind myself, no, you can't go much deeper than this. I'm looking at my dive watch, keeping an eye on my nitrogen levels. And I realized that, you know, if I go much deeper, it's going to be a bit more challenging to come up when it comes to, you know, too much nitrogen in your system. And I don't want to put myself at risk of decompression sickness. So I'm sort of constantly fighting this feeling to go down. But the more I do the dive, it's like, go down, go deeper. And I'm telling my brain, no, I don't want to go deeper. I wanted to see a thresher shark because I've heard they can sort of sit along that area, but the logical side of me said no and started to come up. Now this can be explained by a phenomenon, oh my gosh, called nitrogen narcosis. So at certain depths, if you inhale a lot of nitrogen, you can get a bit silly and feel a little bit drunk, and your thinking might be slowed, and you might get a bit silly, and your thoughts might change to what would normally be logical, like what you would be if you're drunk. So maybe a drunk person would be like, yeah, let's go down deeper. Story number 2. This is where I saved my mom's life in Komodo. So for context, Komodo is kind of notorious for strong ripping currents. And I told my family this, but being my family, they never listened to me, but that's okay. So we've just come off of a sandbank or a sand quay. And I tell my parents, like, look, if you're not standing or you can't stand, then you're swimming directly to the boat. Now, my mum saw some trevally on the way back to the boat. The boat was anchored just a little bit away from the sand quay. So Mum got distracted by some trevally of all fish. And it felt like at that moment, the current really started to pick up. But at the time, Mum not being familiar with the water, she started to get carried away by it. And by the time she noticed, she couldn't make it back to the boat. Now, she was close. My dad was holding on to the boat. My brother was holding on to the Jesus line. And the Jesus line is essentially a rope with a life buoy at the end of it. And so my brother's holding on to it, and I'm just holding on to the line, seeing that my mum is probably no more than 5 meters away from that life ring. And she can't get to it. And I thought, oh dear, she can't fight the current. Well, as a trained rescue diver, maybe I can do something about it. So it literally just like 5 meters away. She can't make distance. She's actually going slowly further and further away. So I tell my family, I'm gonna go get Mum. So I let go of the line and I tell Mum to go on her back and kick and I put my hands on my mom's arm like here and there, and I was trying to tow her as well. So she was kicking, I was kicking, and you could feel this current was picking up by the second. And there was not much we could do. I could see my mum starting to struggle. She was starting to splutter, starting to panic. So I thought, if we keep doing this, I'm going to watch my mum drown in front of me. So I thought, well, we're going to end up in Jakarta today. So I told my mum, don't worry, stop kicking. We're just going to take this current and see where it takes us. But thankfully, as we're sort of making this commitment to the ocean, I look around and I see there's a few boats moored up just to the side of us. We weren't the only ones caught in the current. So there are these other two guys that we saw, and I'm like, come over here, swim towards these boats with the anchor lines. And they said, nope, we're just gonna float. So I thought, you know what, you guys can die, that's okay. I'm worrying about my mom right now. You guys can be difficult, that's your fault. So I managed to get towards the anchor line, but as we're doing it, a little boat drives past, and these boats are just owned by local fishermen, so they don't really speak a lot of English. So my mum, being my mum, just screams, help! And I'm like, Mom, shush, it's okay. Don't scream, it's okay. And the guy in the boat just kind of looking at us like, so they just drive past. And so I get onto the anchor line. My mum's still in a state of panic. She's like, I can't believe this guy didn't come save us. What's going on? I'm like, hey, Mum, it's okay. Do you want to learn some Bahasa? Which is Indonesian language. And so I'm trying to like teach her some things that I learned from the locals, trying to sort of learn the language a little bit. She's not having any of it. So then I start doing like pull-ups on the anchor line. And by doing so, and this is to sort of distract Mum, to sort of be a bit funny, a bit silly. It doesn't really work, but I end up shaking their boat by doing this. So all these confused fishermen look over the bow of the boat and they're thinking, what are these two dumb white people doing on our anchor line? And Mum's like, help us! Big Mum. And so they kind of like nod. They take down a ladder. Current is ripping hard. Like we have to hold on quite tightly to this mooring line to hold on. So we let go and we manage to grab onto the ladder. They take our fins. They talk to the boat, the tour boat that we were with, and they managed to come pick us up after frantically going on their tender boat, picking up all the other people that just wanted to float. So that's how I potentially saved my mum's life in the ripping currents of Komodo. That day, I learned that the most dangerous thing in the ocean and about the ocean is the ocean herself. And I gained a lot of respect for the ocean that day. Story number 3, the unexplainable one. So I decided to do a fun dive in South Australia with a friend of mine. And we decided to explore some areas that we hadn't explored before. I was very familiar with the dive site and just wanted to sort of go further along the cliff face on the dive site. It was a pretty average day. We didn't see much. The visibility was pretty bad. But it was still a fun dive. We found this open cave that we sort of went into, and we could sort of surface in this open cave, and we could see the waves coming into the cave and out of the cave, and that was a really cool experience. And then we went back down and continued around. Then I felt something that I had never felt before as a diver, and I have never felt since. It was a deep sense of anxiety and dread. And I didn't know what it was. And I thought, you know, maybe this is just a bit of anxiety. The visibility is not great. I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm going to try push through. The more I went in that direction, the greater this feeling was. And I don't really spook easy, but this was just such an intense feeling. And I was afraid. And I said to my friend, no, I'm going to follow my gut on this one. And I turned around And when I turned around, almost immediately I had like a wave of relief. I've dived in much murkier waters, much rougher waters, potentially more dangerous waters, but I've never felt that feeling before, and I've never felt it since. For me, that was possibly the spookiest story, spookiest dive I've ever been on. And I couldn't even tell you why. I looked through the footage to see maybe there was like a shadow that, you know, my sixth sense might have picked up on. But I just felt so uncomfortable that dive. And I followed my gut and we got out safe. But I don't know what would have happened if I tried to push through. All I know is that I wasn't comfortable. And, you know, the cryptozoologist, you know, enthusiast in my mind is like, oh, you know, maybe it's like the spawn of Cthulhu. Like, you know, the first story, I like to make a joke, I was getting called to the depths by Cthulhu. Or maybe there was a great white shark there that I just subconsciously felt, because it was in South Australia, very well could have been. Could have been that there was a really nasty current that way. I don't know, I can't explain. All I know is that is my spookiest story that I have. Thank you all for sharing this with me. I'm glad I could tell you some of my stories. And until next time, see you later. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Oh, that looks like a horror film. Junior, 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 Junior.